The general consensus has been for years that men are moving far right, but what if the reality is that women actually went so far left that we didn't even recognize where the center was anymore? Let's get into it. Before we go too far, my name is Casey. I have been a husband, father, and therapist for more than a decade, and I have studied psychology enough to know that the diverging political views between men and women could actually lead to the complete grenade our society never saw coming. If you would like to get behind a future for our children that's worth living in, please like on the way in, and I would love to earn your subscription.
Know that, women. There's a lot of people out there who want you to be stupid because that behooves them. It's in their interest for women to be as stupid as possible. I don't want that. Okay? Even if you disagree with me, even if you are a liberal, know that the liberals who are talking to you want you to be stupid and they want you to feel your way through politics. I want you to be smart and think your way through politics.
A recent graph posted on X that I'll show here says the partisan gap between young men and women have doubled over the last 25 years. And we can see that there was a 12-point gap in about 1998 or 1995, and then we've moved to a 23-point gap. And what actually is demonstrated is that while men do undulate between going more liberal, more conservative, they have remained essentially static, very little maneuvering from 1995 until now, but that women have gone, 30 points more liberal over the last, 25 to 30 years. And this gentleman, Wayne, on X said, "It seems pretty clear to me that we've been told about radicalization for the last 10 years is actually not true. We've been told that men are increasingly radicalized to the right and that this is a bad thing. What actually happened is that women were radicalized exceedingly to the left." And what the psychological viewpoint that's brought out in this article by Vittorio on X makes the case that women's incentive structures are responding to the algorithm and responding to the social pressure that's inherent in social media, and that over that time there's sort of been a feedback loop where they get incentivized to be part of the tribe, and that has exceedingly pushed them left because the zeitgeist, the culture, has been pushed left. And when women respond to those incentive structures with a desire to belong to the culture, they continually get pushed further and further left. Let's read a little bit from the article. It says, "We've been told for a decade that men are radicalizing to the right and that this is dangerous. The data shows the opposite. Men barely moved, women moved 20 points leftward. The story we are told is that exactly inverted from reality. When female leftward movement does get discussed, it's framed as progress, women becoming more educated, independent, and enlightened. They'll tell you that the graph shows enlightenment and progress. This is wrong, according to Vittorio on X. What the graph shows is capture. And it's not just happening in America. All major Western countries, and especially the ones that have persistent access to social media, are being affected in similar ways. The Financial Times documented last year that the gender ideology gap is widening across dozens of countries simultaneously: UK, Germany, Australia, Canada, South Korea, Poland, Brazil, Tunisia. Young women moving left on social issues, and young men either stable or drifting right. This matters because it rules out explanations specific to American politics. It isn't just the American moment. It isn't just immigration or other, the deletion of babies in the womb. It's not just those issues that are causing this shift. It is actually persistent no matter what policies are throughout many of the developing countries in the world, or developed countries. South Korea is the most extreme case. We know about the 4B movement. Here's what Vittorio, and as a psychologist and someone who's worked in the therapy industry for more than a decade, I can say that some of the instincts that are brought out in this article are accurate, or at least they are instinctually embedded in us. And so while he may draw some lines and hunt for some conclusions that, we could draw from just our tendencies, this is still pretty spot on accurate to what I would also imagine are some of the causes.
You are not led by your emotion. You are not stupid. You have been given a brain that is capable of critical thinking, capable of studying, capable of asking questions and being rational and reasonable. Do not prove the stupid manosphere people right by being an idiot. Think. Be compassionate, but don't allow that to suspend your discernment. Okay?
Vittorio says women evolved in environments where social exclusion carried enormous survival costs. What this means is women are much more likely to build a social safety net that is robust, and it was the way that they would have promoted their own survival during thousands of years of development and throughout history. And so if they were considered to be in the out group by the tribe, they would be much more at risk because they have physical vulnerabilities and they were much more tasked with the raising of children. So you can understand in our modern era how an algorithmic social contract is being developed. And if women feel that they're in the out group in that environment online, that they would take that in more deeply, and their need or desire for belonging is much more fervent than men, because men needed to be able to operate independently from those systems, hunting alone or pursuing goals on their own, oftentimes being away from their family or their social systems for days at a time. Men faced different pressures. Hunting parties gone, exploration, combat. They learned to tolerate being alone, disliked, and in the outgroup for extended periods. Men who could handle temporary exclusion without falling apart had more options, more risk-taking, more independence, and more ability to leave bad situations. This shows up in personality research that he brings across. So here's the problem. Here's where it falls apart, or it begins to fall apart. And I've also said this: when a young person comes into my office and they report that they're dealing with symptoms of depression, anxiety, malaise, or other things like that, one of the first things in most cases that I ask them to try is to fast from their phone usage, because we are intended to live where your feet are planted. We are intended to live in the present, and social media, along with just the internet in general, is a future and past tense casting system where it's wired to give your brain threat over and over. The algorithm is meant to give you threat, and even if that threat is something like envy, where you see someone else's social situation or their lifestyle, and that envy becomes something we detect, and we then our attention is cast onto social media ever more. So what Vittorio writes here: social media is a consensus engine. You can see what everyone believes in real time. Disagreement is visible, measurable, and punishable at scale. Think about 2020 and beyond, and we're in this moment again today, obviously, with what's going on in Minnesota. The tribe used to be 150 people. Now it's everyone you've met, plus a world of strangers who are watching you. And look at the timeline. Facebook launched in 2004, but was college only. The iPhone launched in 2007, Instagram 2010. Suddenly, social media was in your pocket and in your face all day and every day. And the rise of the smartphone, of course, Jonathan Haidt talks about this in terms of anxiety and depression pressures among young people. The rise of the smartphone. Few U.S. adults own a cell phone that isn't smart today. And I do think that there's a reversion back to that among even people in Gen Z who recognize that they're depriving themselves of real world interaction. Women were roughly stable through the early 2000s, reading from the article. The acceleration starts around 2007 to 2008. The curve towards left-wing political views steepens through the early 2010s as smartphones became universal and platforms became sophisticated. Women are by nature more liberal, but the radicalization coincides with the rise of smartphone adoption. Of course, it makes so much sense. Social media is meant to sort of instantiate you in your tribe, and when your tribe is siloed or moving in a certain direction, that has particular social pressure among women, because previously their adaptive need was to belong and they needed that tribe in order to survive. The partisan gap doubled in the last 25 years, as we already saw. The machine turned on and the capture began. The mental health collapse among teenage girls tracked almost perfectly with wide smartphone adoption, as per The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, with stronger effects for girls than boys. The same vulnerability that made social exclusion more costly in ancestral environments made the new consensus engines more capturing. They were more compelling because of this. This machine wasn't designed to capture women specifically. It was designed to capture attention, but it captures people more susceptible to consensus pressure more effectively. Women are more susceptible on average, so it captured them more.
Content. The male capture wasn't believe this or face social death. It was here's an endless supply of dopamine, so you never have to build anything real. That's interesting. I mean, I think it's both for each in its own degree, but I agree that one draw is more powerful to men and one draw is more powerful to women, and that's part of why we're seeing these disparate politics.
Men are not out of the loop yet. They have moved somewhat rightward in response to some of the social pressures, but men got different feedback loops because they respond to different incentives. So the algorithm is much more likely to have underpinned certain things for men, like the female body, as along with, okay, so we can take that into the spicy materials type mindset, along with video games where there's incentives to build and to prepare and to level up. All of those things speak more forthrightly to men. So women are being more subjugated by the social media pressures, feeling that they're in the out group, having tribal identity that's given into social structures of leftism, while men are responding more towards being triggered into looking at the female body as well as leveling up while they're online instead of in real life. And so men aren't necessarily off the hook. It's just that they've responded to different incentives. And so that may be a reason why their political views have remained relatively static, although they did undulate. Like I said earlier, it still means that men haven't been responding to social media, which is why, not in as much as women do, which is why things like Gamergate and the attempt to integrate into video games with left-wing politics has been largely a failure, and also exceedingly pointed out by the men that are involved in it, because they went there in order to get respite from the political pressures of society. And when then you try to signal into video games, that ultimately didn't have a very good outcome.
That this has created an echo chamber that has further entrenched college-educated women into their political views. Quote, 4 years surrounded by peers who all believe the same thing, professors who all believe the same thing, reading lists pointing in one direction. Disagreement is not even rare, it is socially punished. Yes, we've seen that. We've talked to people like that on this show. You learn to pattern match. That's an interesting phrase. The acceptable opinions and perform them.
So men are actually moving rightward now, but they had remained mostly static. And Vittorio in this article states that he believes that's because the opposition pressure became so strong and there was so much anti-male sentiment that they had to respond to that pressure, and young men actually did begin to move rightward. Here are some of the predictions that it doesn't require a psychologist to come to, but this is what ultimately will happen if we continue down this road. Number one, the birth rate will continue to collapse as women become much more robust about their political views and not being willing to date someone with opposing political views. The birth rate will continue to collapse as the opportunity to be integrated into these differing opinions will ultimately go by the wayside. Married women are much more likely to vote Republican or be conservative because my theory is at least, they become in balance with the opposite sex partner, and that begins to moderate both sides. So you would probably believe that men also would become slightly more liberal, women would become slightly more conservative when they come into pairing with one another. The fact is that without a Disney movie style romantic encounter and meeting and being delivered into the lives of one another, these political views will continue to push people further and further from dating in the opposite political party.
Woo! true. Fewer women are wanting to get married and have kids, as we see. And that actually, can we put that graph back up? That graph shows that the more married you are, if you are married, you are more likely to be Republican. And if you are single, you are more likely to be Democrat. Now, I've got single conservative friends. By the way, if you're a single conservative related bro, I've got a couple friends that I could set you up with. But it's rare, as you can see. Most of them are going to be Democrat. And that's because I also think marriage and stability and responsibility, and it just has a conservatizing nature to it.
Ultimately, for children, there will be more bureaucracy as children actually are reduced in number. We built a system that was meant to support a certain amount of millions of children in the country, and as those numbers decline, the bureaucracy necessary to encounter and take care of all of those children will only try to grow itself, because it will see the writing on the wall, and those will ultimately lead towards more mental health interventions. Children that have less siblings might actually be less resilient in many settings. They might be less socialized, and so there will be fewer and fewer children coming about, which will lead things like the teachers' unions and the government school system to want to grow itself. And as there's more working adults than there will be children, there will ultimately, at least for a 20 to 30 year period, be a big glut at the top of education. The cohesion and social trust in our society will continue to dissolve. And as men and women continue to diverge in their political views, ultimately, when you make someone identify, as has happened for men in the last few years, when you outgroup someone so fervently, and women are accomplishing more in higher education, more in income, they're more well represented in the boardrooms than they ever had been previously, and the HRification of our national workplace has obviously been a net negative. So as that trust and social cohesion continues to dissolve, men became outgrouped enough that they started to form, and that's why you see the red pill movement and some of those things that have come about. So if you push men further to the side, they will continue to respond in kind, and it's sort of the natural law and Newtonian idea, except applied to psychology and sociology here. There will be a equal and opposite reaction to what you've done to men, and so that will probably push them further to the right. And none of that looks good when it comes to the families, the opportunity to have social trust and cohesion. Higher education, which at one point was founded in order to find out more about God and about the universe that God created, will ultimately be more siloed. It will be more ideologically uniform and less truth-seeking. And that is as it comes out of balance and is actually much more represented by the feminine. Now, I believe, women can do whatever they want. However, it is going to affect these institutions in some ways that are second order consequences that no one had foreseen. And higher education, while it is sort of just a onboarding into your career option now rather than a truth seeking institution that it may have once been, it will continue to be more, and men will discount the value of higher education more and more, and we may actually see some parallel economy development as men say, you don't need a bureaucratic piece of paper in order to do this certain task or job, and we might actually see a little bit of gender specific sectors of the economy. Policing and law and order, the civil service, all those types of things will, as they develop more in the feminine, because women again are graduating higher institutional education more frequently, they're more represented in the sheriffs of many of these departments. If you go to any of these press conferences which have happened in places like Minneapolis or the places in Tennessee, I know in Cincinnati too this was true, the police chiefs are all women now, and while women are probably have a skill set that includes a lot of empathy for offenders and things like that, it will change policing, and it could lead to a little bit more of a empathy first movement in policing, which when you place empathy on the perpetrator, that is cruelty to the victims, and that will probably lead to more mistrust in institutions like policing. Politics will be more based on feelings and stories rather than actual tangible outcomes. This is going to be the year and the decades of the empathy governance. We will be governed by empathy, and you already see this as mainstream media uses grandmas and 5-year-olds in order to push their narrative, because they know that that plays into the empathy systems that women respond with anger to, or respond positively to, or they respond in a siloed way that promotes their set of ideas and ideals, because they know how to cue the system. And when they begin that feedback loop, and women are ultimately in power in many circumstances that they weren't previously, that's actually going to matter in policy. And so it's going to be an empathy governance couple decades. And lastly but not least, the workplace will be one gigantic HR department with 1 or 2 people that are actually functionally doing the jobs, unless we create a parallel economy where there will be less governing of empathy and more governing in reality. The two nations scenario is where we're headed. America becomes 2 parallel societies on the same land if we don't just divorce ourselves altogether. The great divorce might just be coming, and it's because social media and incentive structures have played into men and women differently and have provided the exact formula for us to go further and further apart, until perhaps there will be a revival. Perhaps there will be micro communities and opportunities where people still gather together. They still form relationships in real life. They even deflect and dissuade themselves from use of technology. They teach their children the classics, classical literature, classical education, the trivium, and they begin to restart humanity, just like we did after the Tower of Babel. We restart humanity from brass tacks, and we can see if we could actually unite behind something, anything. If you would like to be united behind a future of faith, fatherhood, and freedom, and an America for our children that's worth living in, please like, share, and subscribe. I would love your support. I appreciate you watching till the end.